Hey guys, this video is made for scholars who are new to the game and or are struggling with some of the new dungeons. We'll be going over how to use scholars toolkits in these dungeons, effectively making it so you have to do minimal GCD healing by using your strong off GCD ones instead. Even if your group isn't the greatest, as a scholar you can carry the run if you know what you're doing. So even if the adds aren't dying as fast or the tank isn't using their cooldowns efficiently, you should still be able to get by with minimal GCD heals. I know this because I've played in groups meeting some of these conditions. At the end of this video we will be going over some heal plans to help you out, so stay tuned. As a scholar, you should be playing proactively. It's a very proactive job, and if you're not using your cooldowns proactively, you are playing scholar wrong. You should not use your tools reactively. Even though their reactiveness has increased a little bit in this expansion, it is still not optimal to play that way. While you should play every healer as a proactive one, on Scholar it's very important. Scholar doesn't have many burst heals, so keeping the tank's HP at a sustainable level is very important in this regard. Before we get started, let's talk about the philosophy of healing. In this game, for the most of its lifetime, offense was always the best defense. This hasn't changed in Shadowbringers. Playing the healing role to its highest potential revolves around DPSing as much as possible while keeping the tank alive. If a pull takes 20 seconds less because you're DPSing, that's 20 seconds less of a tank taking damage. While I think it's unrealistic to expect healers to DPS to such an extreme level, you should still strive to DPS as much as you are comfortable with. You can usually get 3 or 4 AoEs off at the start of pulls before you have to even think about healing the tank. If you're not comfortable with the tank dropping to low HP, then that's okay. Just push your limits slowly. Start with DPSing a little at the start of pulls, and then once you get more comfortable, you can DPS all the way through. It gets a lot easier with experience. That being said, let's get into some of the tips. The first one being, always adloquium the tank before every pull. This gives you some room before the tank starts taking damage to prepare your tools and is a really key point in your dungeon runs. While adloing the tank seems like a pretty obvious tip, one that is not so obvious is adloing yourself. Doing this, you can deploy a full adlo shield off of yourself to the party, more importantly, the tank for back-to-back shields, using deployment tactics. If you are having trouble keeping up with the damage, try this out. Since you practically have unlimited off GCD space, you should always do this once deployment tactics is off cooldown. The second tip is to always use Dissipation at the end of pulls. This gives you 3 full Aetherflow stacks and increases the healing on your Adlo between pulls. This is incredibly strong because it basically enables you the use of 6 Aetherflow in the next pull. By the time your tank gets situated at the end of a wall-to-wall pull, your fairy will be back or close to it, counting those extra Aetherflow stacks towards your fairy gauge while not losing many embraces. The third tip is about using Fey Union. You should strive to use it every other pull because that's when you'll have the most fairy gauge to utilize. While you can use it on pulls back to back, which I do in some of this footage, it's pretty situational. I prefer to go into pulls with an abundance of gauge and using it at the start to keep the tank maintained throughout the pull. One of the main reasons for not using it back to back is because if you're in a slower group, by the time a pull ends, your fairy gauge will be almost depleted, if not already. Another reason is because once you unlock Seraph, it kind of complicates things a little bit. Ideally, you should always use Fey Union at the start of a pull. This is because it keeps the tank's HP healthy without you needing to worry and enables you to act more aggressively. The longer it takes for the tank's HP to drop to a lower HP value is the more time you can DPS comfortably. The only exception to not using it at the start is if your tank is going to pop an invulnerability cooldown. Then you just attach it after its cooldown's duration is over. On to the fourth tip, Sacred Soil. You should always strive to use this at the start of pulls as well, unless you know your tank is going to invuln it. If he does invuln it, you can hold off on using soil until the invuln wears off to get the most value out of your mitigation. The reason for using it at the start is the same reason you use Fey Union at the start. The longer the tank's HP is in a comfortable range, the longer you can DPS. Soil reduces damage taken by 10% while also giving a regen that ticks for a total of 600 potency. The fifth tip is to use Recitation on cooldown, mostly with excogitation. The only abnormality to this rule is if you're struggling with MP or MP management and you have to do a GCD heal. It's then better for you to use Recitation on Adlo at that point. After playing Scholar in dungeons a bit, I don't think it's ever better to use Recitation on an Adlo pre-pull over an excog, and only Recitation in Adlo if you're doing it mid-pull. Of course, those rules are strictly speaking about wall-to-wall pulls, and using Recitation on Indom on bosses is still a good idea. The sixth tip is to use Whispering Dawn at the start of pulls to get that regen ticking, and Fey Illumination during pulls where there are magical auto attacks and or damage, or places where it buffs your Adlos / heals. You're going to want to use Whispering Dawn the exact same way as your other heals, and that's proactively using it at the start of a pull. With its long duration, this ability can even last all the way to the end of one depending on how good your DPS is. There's not much to say about Fey Illumination though, it only works on healing spells which are GCD spells and not abilities like Excog and Lustrate. So your best option is to use it towards the end of pulls or before pulls to buff your Adlo, or use it during pulls if you're going to GCD heal or when your Seraph is out due to it working on Seraphic Veil. Tip number 7 is about handling Seraph. Remember how earlier we were talking about using Fey Union every other pull? When you unlock Seraph, you're going to want that every other pull as well to kind of synergize the spacing with Fey Union. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to do something where you use the Seraph on the first pull and then Fey Union on the second and alternate like that. Using Seraph and Fey Union on the same pull is very inefficient in my opinion and should be avoided unless you absolutely need to. Like maybe a pull is going on way too long. That being said, if you do find yourself in a situation like that where you need to use both, summon the Seraph after Fey Union has been used for a while and not vice versa. When using the Seraph, try to time both constellations so they happen after Seraphic Veil. This makes it so you don't lose a usage of Seraphic Veil. It's pretty hard to even lose one though, but I would still suggest using both. Tip number 8 is our last healing ability, and that is Lustrate. Lustrate is one of our key healing abilities in keeping the tanks alive. Use it when you know it'll get full value, and in certain situations you can use it to avoid excogitation proccing too early. Now on to some of the more unique tips. The 9th tip is very important. Use Chain Strategem during pulls. Even though it only affects one enemy, it's still a free use of an offensive buff and helps kill that one mob down faster. By the time you get to the boss room, it will be back up as well, assuming you use it on the first pull after each boss respectively if it's up. Don't use it on pulls before bosses as it won't be back up for them, and I think that's more important than using it on one piece of trash. Number 10 on our list is using Lucid Dreaming at around 8k MP. Even when you're this high, you will not reach the MP cap spamming Art of War, and keeps your MP at a much more solidified value, and lets you use AoE skills much longer. After the initial use of Lucid Dreaming, you're going to want to pretty much keep it on cooldown unless you won't get the full value of it. Think between pulls where your MP gets capped or after bosses. This is very important for proper MP management, which it seems a lot of scholars have an issue with. Tying into number 10 is number 11, and that is, do big pulls if you can. Big pulls equals less Art of War usage needed to get to the boss room where your mana will fill back up, whereas doing small pulls your mana will run out more easily. Think of it like this. Let's say there are 2 groups of mobs before the boss, and each group takes around 10 Art of Wars. If you pull them separately instead of together, you'd be using 20 Art of Wars instead of the 10 if you had grouped them up together. Mana aside, Scholar's cooldowns also work very well with big pulls and seem to be kind of lackluster when you're just doing one at a time. And to me, I think Scholar handles bigger pulls better than the other healers can. These are all the tips that I can think of currently. If there are some I happen to miss, I'll add them to the description. Now that we talked about our skills, let's make a heal plan with them. To make a heal plan, we have to understand dungeons themselves. Now, Shadowbringers dungeons most always have 2 wall-to-wall pulls before the bosses. Pardon my horrible pronunciation for these dungeons. This is true for Kitana Ravel, Malika's Well, Mount Golg, Amarat, and Academia Anidir. Homemeister Switch follows this formula up until the pulls between the second and final boss, where you're restricted to single pulls. This is the same for the twinning dungeon where there's 3 small wall-to-wall pulls before the first boss, and on Meg where there are 3 pulls before the final boss. Knowing this formula, we can come up with a heal plan. Here's a basic heal plan for the 2 wall-to-wall dungeons. On the first pull, we'll use Fey Illumination pre-pull plus an Adlo, and then Whispering Dawn, Soil, Recitation, XCOG, Seraph, and 2 Lustrates, and then Dissipate at the end of the pull. On the second pull, we'll do an Adlo pre-pull, Whispering Dawn, Soil, Fey Union, XCOG, and 4 Lustrates. And then you're going to want to Adlo deploy the harder pull. So if the first pull is harder, you'll Adlo deploy that one, or the second one, doesn't matter. When we get to the first boss, it will act as the intermission phase for our cooldowns. Still use Whispering Dawn in that, but make sure you hold off on it if the boss is dying soon. Use Recitation. Once the boss is closer to dying, start dumping your Aetherflow slowly, making sure you don't waste it, and then Dissipate. This gives you your Aetherflow ready for the pull after the boss. On the third pull, you're going to want to Adlo pre-pull, plus Whispering Dawn, Soil, XCOG, Seraph again, and at least 1 Lustrate so you can reuse your Aetherflow. Fey Illumination at the end of the pull. On the fourth pull, you're going to Adlo pre-pull, Recitation XCOG, Soil, Whispering Dawn, Fey Union, and then Lustrating until out of Aetherflow if need be. Again, you're going to want to use Adlo deploy off of yourself on the harder pull. It does not matter which one. When you get to the second boss, it will act as the intermission phase for your cooldowns again. Do the same thing you did for the first boss and dump your Aetherflow and Dissipate at the end of it. Fifth pull, Adlo pre-pull, Whispering Dawn, Recitation XCOG, Soil, Seraph, 2 Lustrates, and Fey Illumination after the pull. And for the final 6th pull, you're going to use Adlo deploy, Whispering Dawn, Fey Union, XCOG, Soil, and the rest of your Lustrates. And once again, you're going to Adlo deploy off of yourself on the harder pull. When you get to the last boss, you no longer have to play reservative. You can start unleashing everything you have, so just give it whatever you got. This is a basic heal plan and changes per dungeon, but gives you a basic idea on how to play your cooldowns, spacing them out and not using them all on one pull. Even though when I use the terms do stuff at the start of a pull, try to space them out a little bit. Your first slot would be Soil. 5 seconds later, you would Whispering Dawn, and 5 seconds later, you would Fey Union. You're equally spacing these out so that they cover the duration of the pull. You're not actually unleashing everything right away. That would be inefficient. You want to make sure that you're kind of spacing it out very evenly, so again that it covers most of the pull. Soul at 1 second, Whispering Dawn at 5, Fey Union at 10, XCOG maybe procs at 20 to 30 seconds, and then you lustrate until the pull dies. You shouldn't need more than that. What I think a lot of players do is they underestimate how much healer damage impacts a pull. If you're doing 10,000 DPS on a pull, you're probably cutting that down by at least 20 seconds at most, maybe a little less. That's a lot of time that you're saving just from DPSing, which makes an impact on your healing rotation, because you can use things much closer together, resulting in less GCD heals needed. I just want to make it pretty clear that in this video I am not advocating you to go out and let the tank die from not healing him in dungeons. That's not the point of the video. The point of the video is to help you kind of understand the utility around Scholar's mitigation and their toolkit, right? So don't go into dungeons and try to do more than you're comfortable with, right? Because all that's going to happen is you're going to let the tank die and, cause the dungeon to be longer. Slowly take away things once you know you're comfortable with. So first, maybe do, let's give an example of, let's say 3 physics and 3 Adlos, right? And once you get more comfortable with the healing aspect, you can slowly take away things like maybe the next pull, you could do 2 physics and 2 Adlos, 3 physics and 1 Adlo, slowly take away things you think you might not need. Don't go out and try to pull off something that's 0 GCDs when you're not really comfortable with the job itself or the dungeon. I just want to make that very clear. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. I'm sure I explained some things pretty awkwardly if you're a new player. And again, I'm sure I missed some things. I think I got everything, but again, something may just not be coming to mind. So if you guys see anything, or maybe there's something you guys noticed I didn't say, feel free to say something in the comments and I'll add it to the description. And there's one last piece of advice I'd probably give, and think of healing as a scholar like tanking. You do not want to pop all your cooldowns at once, and you want to space them out throughout the pull. It's kind of the same way, except you're spacing out your cooldowns throughout multiple pulls. Hopefully this helps you guys understand Scholar's utility a bit more, and thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys on my next video. Peace out.